Hi, this is Kelsey Cooper, and I'm the host for Disabled Birth Stories podcast. I hope those in the disabled community can enjoy these stories of bringing beautiful babies into the world and the journey along the way. I hope this podcast helps you feel seen, heard, empowered, and capable, no matter your journey to being a parent. I hope those who are able-bodied would listen to empathize with and support their disabled family member, friend, acquaintance, or random stranger. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us today. After listening to this episode, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please also check the description for our social media links and the link to our merch store. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your medical providers for all of your healthcare needs. Also, the views and opinions expressed by the guests are not necessarily the views and opinions of the host and vice versa. Hi, today I'm here with Jilliann, and she's going to tell her story today. Jilliann, can you start by introducing yourself?
I'm Jilliann Swartfager. I'm 30 years old, and I have 3 kids. I have mild cerebral palsy.
Since cerebral palsy affects everyone a little differently, can you explain how it affects you and how it affects your life, like day-to-day life?
So mine being mild, it affects me with both my legs and then my left arm. So my left arm is weaker than my right. Like, my right is pretty dominant. I do everything when it comes to holding my kids, to doing the dishes, and like using the bathroom. Everything is my right arm. Like, you can tell. I don't know. That, like, I can't flip my right. Like, I can flip my right all the way. I cannot flip my left. So
Pronation and supination, turning the wrist.
Very tight muscles. I have very tight muscles. When I was 8, I had my Achilles lengthened, and then when I was 13, I had my groin lengthened for more. They wanted to get as much, my doctor wanted to get as much growth from my growth plate as they could, so I had my groin lengthened.
Growing up, when you started looking into becoming pregnant, did people ever talk about your disability in pregnancy or birth? And
yes and no. My first baby was kind of a surprise. Like, it wasn't a planned pregnancy at all, so we kind of winged it. I just had a very frank conversation with my first OB. I've had all 3 of my pregnancies have been with different OBs. So each one of them was very different because it was 3 different OBs. Like, my first OB with my son, who's 9, I had been seeing since I was 16. So she knew me really well. And we had kind of had that conversation back when I just saw her at 16 for a different thing. She was like, okay, well, if you want to get pregnant. And I had, I can't remember, orthopedic surgeon. There we go. My orthopedic surgeon, as I was growing up, I had him my entire life. And he, we would always talk about different stages, like, how am I going to play sports was one stage. How am I going to, drive a car? And then when I was getting closer to 18, okay, how are we going to have babies? Like, you can have babies, but you might be a little bit different. Like, your birth stories how you carry might be different. How you actually deliver might be a little bit different. So, when my first OB was like, okay, we'll figure it out, it was like, okay. So, like, I want to say really early on in my pregnancy, she was like, I feel better doing a C-section with you just because I don't know and I'm scared to, like, hurt you more. I think her was more on I don't want to, like, she was just nervous and scared that she was going to do, like, having a vaginal delivery would do damage to me. That is my take about it now. Even 9 years later, I think about it and I'm like, okay, I think she was kind of nervous to do a vaginal delivery with me because I don't think she had ever dealt with somebody with a disability. I'm not saying that, but that's how I felt. And then with it was just like, okay, we're going to do C-section. So I got in that mindset and did a little, as much research as I could about it. Cause I'd never met anybody that had had a C-section before. Like my mom had 4 successful vaginal deliveries. My mother-in-law had 3 successful deliveries. Like everybody that I knew had done vaginal births. So it was different for everybody. So we all did a little bit of research on our own.
And how did you feel about her just, the doctor just saying, you know, I'm going to do a C-section?
Well, when my mom and I started talking about it, and when I was growing up, she was like, Jillian, this might have to be the way, if you want babies, this might be your only option is to have C-sections. So I knew at that point that when I was my mind was already made up when I turned 18, that like if I wanted to have children on my own, I would have to have C-sections. So I knew that the limit, my number of children that I wanted had to be limited. So I would need to find a partner that wasn't expecting 10 kids and I could only give him 3 or 4.
So I guess let's get into the first kind of finding out you're pregnant and how, you know, the start of the pregnancy.
So when I found out that I was pregnant with my son, I was 19 years old. No, 20. I was 20 years old. And he was kind of a oopsie, like, oh no, not saying that's as bad. We like wanted to have a baby, but not right away. Because 20 was young and a lot to put on somebody when they're 20. And we weren't married yet. So it wasn't, we were engaged when we found out we were pregnant, but it wasn't, you know, it was different. We were all kind of shocked, but had him when I was 21 and he was my NICU baby. So his birth is actually, I think, the funniest when it comes down to stories, just period. It's like funny because of what happened before my surgery, and then it's traumatic because of what happened after. So it's like a whole lot of togetherness. So on the morning of my surgery, the nurses can't come in. So my OB is a husband. That OB was a husband and a wife team. So one side of the clinic was like her husband, the other side was her. So they had different, like, I never saw him. I never dealt with his side of the office. I only dealt with her side of the office. When my husband and I first checked into the hospital and we're talking to the nurses and we're getting all like vital signs and everything checked out, he was like, one of the nurses was like, you're having your surgery with Mrs. Matharo, right? And I said, yeah. And I had 2 nurses in at the same time because they were both doing separate things. And I'm like, they're like, oh, that's odd. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, well, we heard that she broke her foot and that Mr. Matharo, Dr. Mr. Matharo will be doing your surgery. And I'm like, my husband and I look at each other. We're like, what? I literally saw her like 2 days ago. What? And they're like, yeah, she broke her foot. And I'm like, okay. And I'm kind of starting to freak out a little bit. I'm like, okay, you know, she said that she was going to be here 2 days ago. Like, what the heck? Started freaking out a little bit. And my husband and then at that time, my mother-in-law had come in to see us, and my mom was on her way because she had to drop my little sisters off at school before she could come to the hospital. And I'm like telling my mother-in-law this, and she's like, okay, you need to like relax, everything's gonna be fine. And then I told my mom, and she's like, just call your mom and you can explain to her. And so I called my mom. My mom's like, okay, it'll be fine. Well, then like 10 minutes after that, my OB comes walking into my room, coming to check it and do like her pre-op kind of check. And I'm like, so how's your foot? And she's like, my foot? And I said, yeah, one of the nurses said that you broke your foot or you like hurt your foot or something. And she's like, my foot is fine. I don't know what they are. So the pre was pretty funny because then she gets in the operating room and she realized that they had all of her husband's instruments out. None of her was already like, she's like, it's okay. Because they were like, oh, we can, after I walked in there and everything, she's like, this is all my husband's stuff. And they're like, oh, well, do you want me to change? They're like, do you want us to change it all out? And she's like, no, it's fine. I guess it's okay. Like, I'll make do. Are we okay? And she's like, yeah, she goes, we use different things. We feel more comfortable with different things. So I was like, okay. She's like, oh, it's fine. She's like, okay, it's okay. Like, she's like, they really thought I hurt my foot. So we're that about hurting her, like her foot hurting before she even did my surgery. It was quite funny.
That is funny. Never heard that before.
Yeah. There. But let somebody from the office and not somebody like just some random stranger that I met him before. So it wasn't like I didn't meet him. I just had never dealt with him.
How did the surgery go? Were you nervous, or was there much to it?
Yes, I was nervous. Well, obviously it was you're nervous before first surgery anyway. I tried to put on a brave face so that no one knew that I was nervous by going into somewhat major surgery. I mean, it's routine, but you hear about things bad happening all the time. It was my first one, obviously, so I didn't know what to expect. I'd read and done research, but you never know. I mean, the biggest thing for me was I didn't know. I mean, I knew that your birthing partner stays out of the room for an X amount of time, but I didn't realize how long it was and what they were doing when he was out of the room. Like, I didn't realize that they were, cauterizing and opening me up, and they wait until after, like, that is done to bring him into the room. So that was kind of like I was asking for him because I wanted him there. But they're like, oh, we'll bring him in. It was about 10 minutes. So 10, 15 minutes, I want to say. Yeah, so I just was nervous. Also, I was alone. Like, you don't really think about that. You have all those people around you, but you're alone. Like, they don't really know you unless you happen to know them really well. And I mean, I knew my doctor, but not like enough to be like, oh yeah, like I felt comfortable, but not comfortable enough that I felt like less nervous.
So once they brought your husband in, what happened after that? Was it immediately like starting the surgery and getting the baby out, or did they prep him and explain things to him?
Oh yeah, before I even left my room, my pre-op room, they gave him his scrubs and his cap and everything and explained what's going to happen to him. So, like he waits and I walk down and they kind of start the surgery. They give me the shot in my back, so the anesthesia, because it numbs you from like essentially your boobs down, and you don't feel anything. So they basically said, we'll come and get you in 10 minutes. Well, 5 minutes, I want to say, because it was about a 5-minute walk from my pre-op room to the operating room. So he just hung out. And, when I asked him, like, how did he feel? I was like, I was nervous. I was scared because you weren't there and I didn't know what was going on. So, because in your birthing classes, because we did go to birthing classes, like, in your birthing classes, which sucks, is that they don't tell you or they don't inform anybody about how C-sections happen. It's all about Lamaze, like how your breathing is and how all this, like how your partner's going to be this, and this. And he goes, I wish that in the birthing classes, because there are situations where you're going to have emergency C-sections, or your baby is breech and you end up having a C-section, or there's something happen. And he goes, and you're not prepared. Like, as a partner, I felt, yes, you do all this research, but like we had a chance to do research. Like there's birthing partners and moms themselves, or I shouldn't say moms. There's parents that don't really get the chance to be able to prepare for a C-section and know what happens. Because we had a friend, actually his cousin, his wife had an emergency C-section to the point where she had to be taken out. So his cousin wasn't even allowed in the operating room when she was giving birth. So that was like, he goes, I wish that they could have prepared him or prepared us for C-sections, because there's not a lot of, birthing classes that give any information about C-sections for parents or, supporting birthing partners. It's not talked about, and it should be, not just for people with disabilities, but for other parents that are wanting to give birth.
When the surgery started, did it feel quick? Did everything go as planned?
Yes, everything went as planned. For him, for my son, it was my first, so it was the first cut. He was actually sitting up very high, like my hips did not spread at all. So that was a challenge for me, because I noticed that my hips didn't spread. So my doctor, she goes, as we're trying to get the baby out, he did not want to come out. She goes, most doctors have like, whatever, a certain amount that they open. So, she actually goes, I had to open him up even more. I had to open up you even more than I normally do. And, he was stuck in there. Like, it took them a good, 10 minutes to get him out, because he was nice and cozy. He was like, I'm not coming out.
Did the surgery happen, near your due date, or, what part of gestation did this surgery take place?
So, he was my closest baby to gestational. I would think he was 39 weeks and 4 days, because my due date was the 18th of February. He was born on Valentine's Day. So 38 weeks and 4 days, or 39 weeks and 4 days, something like that, which was great. I was very happy to be able to keep him in that long. My other two, not so much.
Once he was out, what happened?
I did not get chest to chest or skin to skin contact with him right away. Nothing was wrong with him. At that time that we thought, they just were, the hospital that I was at was very okay, he goes over there, Dad, you go over there, follow him. We're going to focus on her. So I did not get to see him until after he had already gotten his APGAR score and he had gotten cleaned off and everything like that. So, and then my husband brought him over so I could see him while they were finishing. And then they literally were I maybe kissed on him for 5 minutes, and then they sent him off to the NICU with my husband and did the rest of his newborn screenings and all of that. And then I saw him again in pre-op.
And was the reason for the NICU just to do the screenings, or was there more to him going?
No. So 24 hours. Sorry, I might get a little bit emotional about this because it is it's a lot. 24 hours. So I had him on a Friday morning. Saturday, the on-call pediatrician was like, we hear a heart murmur. All babies are born with a heart murmur. He was born with 2. So he goes, I hear a second heart murmur. We're going to have to do some more research. We're going to go take him to get an echo. And I said, okay, that's, no big deal, whatever. And then, so they took him to go get an echo. And I was like, okay, sweet. I can get some rest, maybe, eat some food, hang out for a little bit, hopefully take a nap because the night before. And he came back and they didn't really say anything to me. He did great through his echo, whatever. I want to say a few hours after that, the on-call pediatrician calls me on the phone and tells me, we're transferring your son from this hospital to the local Valley Children's Hospital, which was a blow to the gut, but I was thankful that they were transferred to that hospital because I had been seen at that hospital before. I had some knee work done at that hospital, so I knew that hospital was great. I was just very taken aback because literally I get this call, and I'm not saying I was very taken aback, and the people that were in the room with me at the time were not the proper people to be in the room with me at that point. And I'm not saying that they weren't supportive, but it was, my husband had just walked away. He was going home to get some clothes, as at that time, the hospital wasn't sure if I was going to be able to keep my private room. Earlier that day, they were like, we might have to move somebody else in. So, Dad, you might not be able to stay the night. That's what they were saying. But no, so he had gone to go get some clothes from home because they'd given him the, okay, oh, she's staying in this room. We're not moving anybody else in. Go get some clothes, go take a shower, whatever. She'll be fine. I had my dad and my soon-to-be father-in-law in the room with me when I got that call. So two people that aren't really like, I mean, they're emotional, but they didn't know what to do. They were just like looking at me. And I also had my sister was 12 or 13. So I had my very new teenage baby sister, and she's the youngest. So she's like, what do we do? And I'm on the phone, and I just dropped the phone. I don't even hang it up. I just dropped the phone, and I'm crying. And I'm not even holding my baby at the time. My father-in-law is holding my baby. And he's like, what's going on? My sister rushed. I remember she rushed over to me, and I was like, they're taking him to Valley Children's. And I don't even know what happened, because all of a sudden my sister has me in arms, and then it felt like not even 2 minutes later, but I hear my husband's boots stomping back, and she has me in in this hold, and by then my mom and my mother-in-law are both in the room, and they're like, whoa, like, what's going on? Because apparently my sobs, like the whole maternity floor could hear my sobs. Like, I guess, like, after everything died down, like, the nurses were telling me, like, other moms were, like, checking on me because my whole sobs were, like, engulfing the whole maternity ward. And, like, the nurses were like, oh, like, her baby's getting transferred, and they're like, oh my gosh. So, like, I had all these other moms that were totally, like, asking about me because my sobs were just, I was a mess. And this was literally, I want to say, 2 weeks before the NICU that was going to be built in the hospital was finished. So if I'd gone to my due date, and most new moms go after their due date, if I had gone after my due date, we probably wouldn't have been separated at all. So because I had a C-section, he had to go by himself. They wouldn't release me from the hospital. So I had to be separated from him for 24 hours. That was the hardest. No. Yes, 24 hours. They let me go. The next morning, mid-morning, I got to go. They let the hospital let my mom spend the night with me because my husband, obviously, I didn't want my newborn baby being alone. So my husband and my mother-in-law went to the other hospital with my baby they actually beat the ambulance to the hospital. Yeah, that was, my mother-in-law told me, she's like, you don't want to know how fast I was going. And I'm like, okay. My husband goes, his best friend was in the front seat because my husband was a sobbing mess because he's like, I'm leaving we were fiancés at the time. He's like, I'm leaving my fiance who is a sobbing mess. But I was like, you do not leave his side. Like, she is your main priority. And that was a big thing with my mother. Both of our moms were like, I call them my moms. Our moms were, my mom's got to take care of her baby now, and you, husband, have to take care of your baby now. Like, that's your job. And, we were in communication all the time. I don't think my mother-in-law or my husband got any sleep that night because they just wanted to hold him because, he was the biggest baby in the NICU. They were all the NICU ladies, when I got to the hospital, were like, we're so happy to have him because he was this 8-pound, 1-ounce baby that's going to the NICU. Sorry, my puppy. Yeah, they're like, it's so nice to have a baby that, is big and not these tiny babies we're used to.
So how long was he in the NICU for?
It was in the NICU for 2 days, so 48 hours.
And it was mostly just monitoring, or?
Mostly monitoring to see if he needed extra medication or if he needed to have surgery, because where his VSD is right by the left ventricle. So they wanted to make sure that his blood flow was going into the ventricle and not out the additional hole that he had. So he's fine now. He's 9 years old and he doesn't take any medication. He's never had any surgery. We just get yearly update. Go for a yearly echo. And that's pretty much everything. Like, he's healthy. He's growing. He's almost as tall as me. I'm not that tall. So he's a good little boy.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I loved hearing all your stories.
Thank you for let jab, because I feel like I jabbed a lot.
No, it's fine. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com.